This is A Course in Miracles. It is a required course. Only the time you take it is voluntary. Free will does not mean that you can establish the curriculum. It means only that you can elect what you want to take at a given time. The course does not aim at teaching the meaning of love, for that is beyond what can be taught. It does aim, however, at removing the blocks to the awareness of love's presence, which is your natural inheritance. The opposite of love is fear, but what is all-encompassing can have no opposite. This course can therefore be summed up very simply in this way. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. This is a reading from the Course in Miracles. Chapter 11, God or the Ego. Introduction. First paragraph, either God or the ego is insane. If you will examine the evidence on both sides fairly, you will realize this must be true. Neither God nor the ego proposes a partial thought system. Each is internally consistent, but they are diametrically opposed in all respects, so that partial allegiance is impossible. Remember, too, that their results are as different as their foundations, and their fundamentally irreconcilable natures cannot be reconciled by vacillations between them. Nothing alive is fatherless, for life is creation. Therefore, your decision is always an answer to the question, "Who is my father?" And you will be faithful to the father you choose.
Choosing a father is choosing an author, and if you go by the scientific method, I guess you would have to choose the Big Bang, which they've chosen that as the ultimate father for us, which is a random event, mysterious, impersonal, in whatever, in a place where there's no space even. Space wasn't even created at this point. It's just this thing they call a singularity. But you can see the effort made in our paradigm to be, I don't know if you call it politically correct or religiously correct, to avoid the idea that there's a God, a personal author with a consciousness.
Yeah, intelligence.
We just want to avoid that. And you will be faithful to the Father you choose. So if I choose the Big Bang, in a sense, that's a symbolic term, same as God. God's symbolic, Big Bang is symbolic. We don't know what God is, and we don't know what the Big Bang is.
Right.
So what's the difference? And the Course is saying that the ego and and God's system, they're the same. I mean, they're both internally consistent. They're not the same. They're internally consistent in the same manner. In other words, you're going to see all the proof in the world that the egoic system works.
Well, yeah, because if you choose only the mind of the ego to be the mind that you're following, then you're going to have the results of what the ego comes up with. But if you choose the mind of God, in little efforts, like I said, it's always little efforts towards God, then you'll begin to have the witnesses that I've made those choices, because there's an upliftment of inside, a lightness of being that begins to come about, and the world does not seem so harsh. Even my own mind doesn't seem so harsh anymore against myself.
Well, there's a problem that comes up with this. I can see it immediately. Who is my father? And you will be faithful to the father you choose. If I choose the Big Bang as a father, in other words, I insist on being a child of scientific correct science, let's say, and all that flows out from that. That's just the way we're built. In other words, if you go on CNN, imagine CNN, I'm using them as a placeholder, it could be any of them.
Right.
But you go on CNN and some guy is going to say, well, the Big Bang, blah, 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 we've got this talking head expert, and he's going to explain to us about some stuff. Okay, and everybody goes, yeah, this is great. Now, imagine Jake Tapper, the same guy, let's say, coming out and saying, well, we all have God as our Father, and he resides in heaven. Now, we don't know where heaven is, and we're not sure what this means, but we've got this expert to tell us about this. We're going to feel like, what the hell? Who bought this TV station? Who took it over? Mm-hmm. In other words, you can tell who we've chosen as our Father in this paradigm. Yes. And so that when you and I decide, well, God is my Father, mm-hmm. we're going to meet a diametrically opposed system on nearly every choice, every decision, every attitude we take.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah,
right?
And it is an internal thing to reject the false father. I mean, where you begin to say, how much of this is really, really true, and how much of it tells me about myself?
Wait, how much of which?
Of the knowledge that is coming through on a flat screen versus a knowledge that is internal, that is coming from my Father.
Okay, I'm going to go back to Lindsberg. Okay, Lindsberg is a little Swedish town not far from here.
Okay.
Long story short, I'm in Lindsberg. Great store, by the way, in Lindsberg. Go stop in and you get all this Swedish, Nordic, Teutonic stuff.
Everything you can think of.
Socks with reindeer on them and stuff like that. Yes. While I'm in there, it's such a compelling orb of Swedishness.
Yes, you want to be
I felt like I want to be Swedish.
Absolutely.
Well, that's the problem we got.
I know.
With the ego.
I understand what you're saying.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, I'm not Swedish.
I know.
And yet...
I know.
Now, can you see why I'm making that stretch?
I absolutely can.
So this idea about saying, no, see, I've seen the light, and I'm going to choose God. That's like being in Lindsberg, in this Swedish store, and saying, you know what? The hell with these Swedish people. I'm going to be Russian.
Whatever. I know.
No, I'm going to be African.
I know, but to me, the main thing about this paragraph is the vacillation between the two. And so long as you're vacillating, you will never come to know the truth about yourself, or because of the results, because of the gifts of the ego always leave you with a sense of needing something else.
But do you understand the vacillation?
I do.
The vacillation is a piece of wisdom from the ego. It's egoic wisdom to choose God sometimes.
Right.
Why? Because
only on Sunday.
Right. It gives the ego, the ego's cover will not be blown. Because the ego can't be consistent.
Right.
And the only way the ego can be inconsistent is to flip into the God thing every once in a while. You understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
It's pretty diabolical.
Yeah, and that's
because then the ego actually co-opts God language to sustain itself indefinitely.
Yeah, and then it makes itself God by making itself its own creator. We're going to get into that.
Okay, so I should read.
Yes.
Yet, what would you say to someone who believed this question really involves conflict? If you made the ego, how can the ego have made you? The authority problem is still the only source of conflict because the ego was made out of the wish of God's Son to father him. The ego then is nothing more than a delusional system in which you made your own father. Make no mistake about this. It sounds insane when it is stated with perfect honesty, but the ego never looks on what it does with perfect honesty. Yet, that is its insane premise, which is carefully hidden in the dark cornerstone of its thought system. And either the ego, which you made, is your father, or its whole thought system will not stand. So, I've got to ask again, if I made the ego, then the ego is resting on something. It's the mad idea. The ego is not the mad idea. The ego is something I made.
Well, that is the mad idea.
No. There's a mad idea. Mm-hmm. In order for me to live it out and accomplish it, mm-hmm. I invented this thing, the ego. Uh-huh. And all the ego is you take all of God's consistency and all the God qualities, identify them on a piece of paper, and then in column 2, okay, that's column 1.
Do the opposite.
Column 2, do the opposite.
Absolutely.
And that's the ego. Now, the other thing about the ego is when you write that in column 2, as it says here, you're not allowed to see column 2 because you'll go, this is ridiculous. And so you flip into column 1 every once in a while. When you start feeling like the ego is about to ruin your party of existence, when the ego starts to become too clear as to what it's up to, you'll abandon it. So the ego requires the God system. Anyway, I think it's fascinating, and I think that,
Yeah. I'm going to see if there's anything else in there. Just the idea that I've made something that I can be the father of myself. The idea that I created myself, that I wasn't made. I mean, that's just a strange thing. That you can.
Do you understand? The ego's not going to let you say that.
I know.
The ego's not going to let you say you fathered yourself. The Course will tell you that because it's trying to tell you the truth.
Right.
Now, but if I go into it and we go back to the Big Bang, well, sure, I didn't make myself. I was just, stirred up out of some amino acids, and I don't know, those came out of, these stars that collided, and I can't understand that. I'm not a physicist. So that's what created me. That's how the ego deals with authorship.
Yes.
In our origins. It loses it in obfuscation.
Yeah, I agree.
There will be no clarity there because you saw the clarity that the Course presents, you'd abandon the ego. And if you believe what the Course is telling you, you abandon the ego.
Right, and I've also noticed, it's just an observation, that science is invented out of dissection, which is a form of destruction. You have to take something apart.
You got to kill it.
Yeah, you basically got to kill it, or you got to tear it apart in order to find out what's inside of it and what is its smallest parts. But God is built on construction. It is always extending. It's always reaching. It's always infinite. So it's just kind of interesting that one is built off of this taking it apart all the time. It always takes it apart. Whether it's even when you go to a psychologist or something, they take, you take apart the thoughts that you have and everything else to find what you are. And you can't find it that way. You have to only have a remembrance has to be dropped.
Well, there's that book, I forget the guy's name. It's a tarot book, big fat thing. And he discusses the origin of, let's say, true religion or true metaphysics. The search for truth would be Yahweh, these 4 syllables, Yahweh, Yahweh. And science is, by definition, the opposite order. Yahweh, it would be Heva, anyway, whatever it is backwards. So science is literally the backwards. In other words, in science, you take it apart and slowly reassemble it.
Right.
And in religion or in truth, you deal with whole systems and you don't destroy them. So science deals with partial things and then says, there, see, we've seen you can see the problem with it. I mean, if I'm going to examine and say, what's a human body? Well, let's cut it up into a million pieces or isolate its organs.
Right.
And then define each organ. You can see that you've got serious problems here.
Absolutely. And you really can't put it back together once you've taken it that far apart.
Yeah, you've sort of ruined the proverbial teamwork thing.
Exactly. Okay. Paragraph 3. You make by projection, but God creates by extension. The cornerstone of God's creation is you, for his thought system is light. Remember the rays that are there unseen. The more you approach the center of his thought system, the clearer the light becomes. The closer you come to the foundation of the ego's thought system, the darker and more obscure becomes the way. Yet even the little spark in your mind is enough to lighten it. Bring this light fearlessly with you and bravely hold it up to the foundation of the ego's thought system. Be willing to judge it with perfect honesty. Open the dark cornerstone of terror on which it rests and bring it out into the light. There you will see that it rested on meaninglessness, and that everything of which you have been afraid was based on nothing. That's something. Oh, that's nice.
Well, I thought of David and Goliath there, where you've got David representing the God's thought system in the world of the ego. Goliath being the egoic system. It's a soul-crushing presence, terrifying to behold. But with a little willingness, which would be a little stone, you launch it and cold cock this thing right in the third eye. And when you enlighten this thing, with this little willingness, it goes down.
So what's the analogy there compared for this?
The analogy is you make God, the cornerstone of God's creation is you, for his thought system is light. It says, the closer you come to the foundation, yet even the little spark in your mind is enough to lighten it. In other words, all I have is that little stone. All I have is my little slingshot of the little willingness.
Okay, got it.
No, what I'm saying is that when I approach this, when I take the course into my life, I likely will feel similar to David and Goliath. I'm not going to feel like I've got an artillery behind me.
I agree.
I'm going to feel like a little pitiful wimp with a couple of pocket of pebbles, and I'm going to deal with the scientific paradigm. And the scientific paradigm wants to take its big hairy knuckles and crush me.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, right.
And instead, I've got my little pebbles, and so I have to be willing to stand there and launch, stand and deliver, so to speak. And my whole point is, a lot of times I read these things, okay, and I go through it thinking, oh well, I return to this. It's just a book. This is a hobby. This is a hobby horse. No, this is my pebble. I'm supposed to go out and confront Goliath with this thing.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
I'm supposed to undo the egoic thought system.
Yes.
Where is the ego's thought system? Everywhere.
Right.
Everywhere.
Yes.
So
I liked in this one that it said that we're the cornerstone because, in biblical teachings, Christ is the cornerstone.
The stone that the builders rejected.
Right. But it's still Christ that is the cornerstone. We call it Jesus the Christ. But in the Course, we are one with the Christ, light. So this is re-emphasizing
So
that
we are the cornerstone.
we are the cornerstone.
Well, and it says that in other places.
Yes.
Paragraph 4. My brother, you are part of God and part of me. When you have at last looked at the ego's foundation without shrinking, you will also have looked upon ours. I come to you from our Father to offer you everything again. Do not refuse it in order to keep a dark cornerstone hidden, for its protection will not save you. I give you the lamp, and I will go with you. You will not take this journey alone. I will lead you to your Father, who hath need of you, as I have. Will you not answer the call of love with joy?
Isn't that great? Jesus goes with us. That's the part I love the best, because I will go with you. See, there's always a sense that when you start to go at the Course that you're doing this alone. But then you recognize, no, that's impossible. How could you ever be alone? Because you're inside God and everything is there.
The ego is an interpretation of God's creation. The ego is an interpretation. And it says, when you examine the ego's foundation, you'll examine ours as well.
And one of them will stand and the other one will.
Well, it will have a reinterpretation.
Right.
We'll be looking at the same thing, but it will be reinterpreted. It's not like the ego's foundation is rotten. The ego has nothing. It doesn't have enough creativity to create a rotten foundation.
So you're saying that the ego is resting on the real foundation.
The ego co-opts every shred of God's beautiful creation for itself with this insane reinterpretation, point for point, of God's creation. It's a reinterpretation, point for point.
Okay, but will you not answer the call of love with joy? That's a good question. I will. I want to. Okay. The second, we're on...
Well, that's the end of that section.
Yes.
Okay, so let's